Illinois 2. The wreckage of the Black Death, as the Soviet Illinois 2 aircraft was called by German soldiers, was found in a swampy forest near the town of Mga, Leningrad Oblast, on August 31, 1942. This plane was shot down. At that time, fierce battles were taking place near Mga. From August 27 to 31, 3 Soviet pilots were killed in aerial combat. 2 went missing, and 4 others, who had lost their planes, survived. On August 31, 21-year-old Sergeant Nikolai Trofimovich Glyakin, a native of Oryol, was on another combat flight. He didn't return from the mission. According to the report from the crews, Sergeant Glyakin was shot down by enemy fighters, crashed into the ground, and exploded. This was described by Captain Starodumov, the commander of 211th Assault Aviation Regiment, in his report to the commander of the 281st Assault Aviation Division. The large losses in the flight crew are explained by the insufficient experience of the regiment's pilots, who began combat operations under difficult weather conditions from day one. While the main crew members had experience, it was mostly in the southern regions. During the combat missions, our fighters provided insufficient air cover, and the inexperienced young flight crew was unable to defend themselves against enemy fighters. 3 search parties were sent to find the Downwell Illinois 2. The work in the swampy forest was difficult, but the team did not give up. Gradually, they began recovering more and more pieces. When combat shells were found at the excavation site, the searchers called in rescuers. The participants of the operation discovered not only fuselage parts, fragments of wings, engine components, and the cockpit, but also rocket shells, RS-82, and cannon armament. In the excavated cockpit, the remains of the pilot and his personal belongings were found. By the serial numbers of the engine components, it was confirmed that Nikolai Glyakin had piloted the Illinois 2. The armored cockpit and some parts were sent to the museum, and the pilot was given a military burial with full honors. WW3 fighter. Another World War II aircraft was discovered by treasure hunters from Russia near St. Petersburg. The wreckage of the single-seat Soviet WW3 fighter had sunk 2 meters into the swampy soil. Fragments of the fuselage, the pilot's map, and weaponry were found. The thick clay resisted for a long time, reluctant to reveal the secret of the aircraft's final resting place. The names Lavochkin, Gudkov, and Gorbunov belonged to the aircraft's designers. The first letters of their surnames gave the aircraft its name, WW3. Soviet aircraft designers developed this combat plane before the war, and it later became one of the main frontline fighters. The WW3 provided cover for Soviet Illinois 2 and P-2 bombers, and engined in aerial combat with German fighters. The gun was loaded with 20mm shells. The barrel was bent, indicating the plane had fallen almost vertically. One can only imagine the force with which the plane struck the ground, disintegrating into small fragments. The searchers were particularly interested in the metal parts that could reveal a serial number, and such parts were indeed found. On a fragment of the engine cowl, the last 4 digits read 2889. This allowed the identification of the pilot and the aircraft. On September 9, 1942, Sergeant Ivan Kuzmich Lyakishev, born in 1919, did not return from a combat mission. He was from the village of Novomikhailivka, Oryol Oblast. No photo of him exists. The casualty report only lists his sister, Maria Lyakisheva, and the address was Moscow. This was a great stroke of luck. The paper survived in the routing map case. The call sign Буря (Storm) was still legible. Inside the pocket was a pencil, with which the pilot, whose remains were never found at the crash site, had scratched an approximate map of the area. The search team of Wings of the Motherland preserved every scrap of paper. In addition to the maps and sketches, the case contained 2 empty notebooks and a commander's ruler. The fighter was shot down during the Sinyavina offensive operation when, in the fall of 1942, the forces of the Volkhov and Leningrad fronts attempted to break the siege of Leningrad. It is presumed that he managed to bail out, but since the area was occupied by the enemy, he most likely died, either while crossing the front line or simply in the air. We sustained quite heavy losses. On that day alone, 12 planes were listed as shot down across all the regiments fighting in that area, said Viktor Sobolev, the head of the Wings of Motherland search squad. The aircraft parts were transferred to a local museum. Partisan cache. 2 young men from Ukraine were walking through the forest with metal detectors, searching for World War II artifacts. Their attention was drawn by a loud signal from the metal detector, indicating a large metal object on the ground. Carefully digging, the treasure hunters discovered a hidden stash of ammunition and Molotov cocktails. A Molotov cocktail is a glass bottle filled with flammable liquid and a mechanism for ignition. These bottles were widely used by the Red Army to destroy German armored vehicles during the war. Also retrieved from the hole were several zinc boxes with labels in Polish. The man carefully opened one, finding ammunition in excellent condition. It seemed that moisture had not penetrated the box, and it is possible that these rounds could still be used. What do you think? Should ammunition that has been buried in the ground for around 80 years be used? The general script. A few years ago, in the Russian city of Sarov, the grave of a hero of the 1812 war, General of Infantry Boris Polyektov, was discovered. Archaeologists from the Institute of Archaeology were conducting excavations in preparation for the restoration of the Church of the Life-Giving Spring and the study of a medieval Moldovan settlement. The most significant find came from the necropolis near the church, where 21 burials, mostly monks, were located. Among them, a double burial of a man and woman stood out. Inside the male burial, fragments of a military uniform with epaulets were preserved. On the right hand of each body, a gold wedding ring was found, with engraved inscriptions. For the man, L.F.G.B.V.P, November 4, 1817. For the woman, B.V.P.L.F.K.G, November 4, 1817. These details allowed historians to positively identify the couple as the General Boris Vladimirovich Polyektov, July 1, 1779, to October 6, 1843, and his wife, Princess Lyubov Fyodorovna Gagarina, 1793 to April 21, 1862. General Polyektov fought in nearly every major battle of his time, including Austerlitz and Borodino, took part in the campaign abroad and reached Paris with his regiment. He died in Warsaw in 1843 and was brought back to Russia for burial. 19th century weaponry underwater. In 2011, a fishing trawler off the coast of Newfoundland snagged something unexpected while dragging nets at a depth of 800 meters. What they pulled up was a crate of 20 P-53s Enfield rifle muskets, still remarkably well preserved after 150 years underwater. The P-53 Enfield was widely used by British Army, notably during the Crimean War and American Civil War, and was considered a first-class rifle. Its parts were machine-made and interchangeable, very modern for the 1850s to 1860s. The rifles were packed in partially intact wooden crate, with walnut stocks and brass fittings still visible. Historians believe the shipment was intended for Confederate forces during the American Civil War, but never made it. In 1863, the ship, carrying weapons, ammunition, and European goods, ran aground on a sandbar off Fort Moultrie while attempting to evade Union blockade ships. The crate was transferred to historians for conservation and study. The attic stash. This discovery took place in the city of Tula, Russia. During a roof repair several years ago, workers found a hidden stash of etched weapons in the attic. Inside were a 19th century dragon saber and several early 20th century bayonets. The attic had remained dry over the years, so the condition of the items was fairly good. After a short photo session, the weapons were handed over to the local museum. The identity of the person who hid them remains unknown, as the house had changed owners multiple times. A similar discovery was made by two treasure hunters in the attic of a pre-revolutionary house. While clearing sawdust, they came across a hidden officer's saber. Unfortunately, the house was abandoned and the roof leaked, so the leather scabbard was badly decayed. Interestingly, the imperial mark of Tsar Nicholas II had been stretched off, suggesting the last owner might have been a revolutionary or Red Army commander. Chronicle of the Lost Bomber. This story took place in 1998 in the northern reaches of Russia, in the Arkhangelsk region. Search teams managed to examine the wreckage of a fallen plane and finally unravel the mystery of its demise. Far from human settlements and roads, two hunters stumbled upon the remains of a crashed military aircraft, along with the skeletal remains of its pilots. The area was marshy and nearly impassable, so preparing for the perilous expedition to investigate the bomber took several years. In the autumn of 1998, a group of enthusiasts ventured deep into the taiga in search of the bomber. The journey was long and arduous. They had to traverse dense forests, swamps, and mountain rivers. Here is an account from one of the expedition members. Our crossings over minor water obstacles were otherwise less dramatic. Even the monotonous drizzle couldn't overshadow the anticipation of unveiling the taiga's secret. We knew the plane we had discovered was untouched, with its crew and documents intact. The closer we got to our goal, the more our spirits lifted. Emerging onto yet another swamp, we noticed the guide signaling with his hand. To the left. At once in another 200 meters, we delved deeper into the taiga, where 2 century-old spruces concealed a winding, deep canyon carved by the Chukcha Forest River. On its bank, something white glinting through the green. 50 more steps. And there it was, the tail of the fallen giant, its extinguished stars encircled in black trim. We had arrived. I remember a peculiar click in my mind. The trim, that was pre-war. It has been abolished after the Highland Gaul confusion regarding insignia. This referred to the armed conflict between Soviet-Mongolian forces and the Japanese army, which raged from spring to autumn 1939 along the Halkin Gol River. Remarkably preserved, Dishka's aircraft machine gun lay in the fractured fuselage, split cleanly along its technological seams. Examining the wreckage and crash site allowed us to piece together the tragedy's broad strokes, and subsequent investigations unveiled the full story in vivid detail. On December 17, 1939, at approximately 9 a.m. to 9:05 a.m., just as dawn broke, a bomber commanded by Senior Lieutenant Georgy Vasilievich Karalkin of the 80th Bomber Aviation Regiment hastily took off from the island airfield Yagodnik, located 17 kilometers from Arkhangelsk along the northern Dwina River. The urgency was dictated by the Army's offensive that began the same day. Bomber strength was crucial for dismantling Finnish fortifications. The Soviet Finnish, or Winter War, had hit its first roadblocks, and the bombers were tasked with obliterating the fortified pillboxes. The weather that day was atrocious. 100% low cloud cover. Gusty winds at 10 to 12 meters per second. Air temperatures hovering between 0 and -2 degrees Celsius. A snow cover of 10 to 15 centimeters, and by evening, the predicted snowfall had begun. Miserable conditions, fraught with the perils of low-altitude flight and ice formation in the humid air. The bomber, carrying 4 crew members, set its course westward, bound for the war front in Ukhta. At 9:22 on onboard time, the plane crashed into the forest. Today, it is difficult to pinpoint the exact cause of the crash. Most likely, it was the usual interplay of circumstances culminating in a fatal outcome. Adverse weather conditions, pilot error, icing, perhaps technical malfunctions. The undeniable fact remains: the SB-2 bomber, with its engines running at nominal power, struck the treetops on the high bank of the Taiga River and was shredded by the trunks upon impact, as if it were made of paper, ripped to the shreds. The wreckage was scattered over an area no larger than 30 by 20 meters. There was no telltale impact crater. Everything remained on the surface, soaked in a gasoline and oil. Miraculously, the shattered aircraft did not burst into flames. The bomber, manufactured at factory number 22 in Kazan in August 1939, never made it to war. In the 2 days following the disappearance of the crew, a squadron of TB-3 bombers from the same 80th Bomber Aviation Regiment conducted 25 search flights. Yet, no trace of Karalkin's plane was found. At first glance, the crash site offered little information. It was evident that everyone on board had perished here. However, a meticulous examination of the site allowed investigators to begin piecing together the details of the catastrophe and reconstructing its sequence of events. Pilot Karalkin's body, upon impact, crushed the control yoke, his lifeless form hurtling through the twisted metal of the aircraft like a helpless pawn in a grinder of steel. The radio gunner's parachute lay in the fractured fuselage alongside its owner. His skeletal remains were buried under a thin layer of leaves and needles, their auburn hues contrasting sharply with the splintered bones. Judging by the halved ribs, compressed cervical vertebrae, fractured skull, and other severe injuries, it was clear that Senior Sergeant Yan Grigorievich Komarichev, the radio gunner, had been gravely, fatally injured. Moreover, upon impact, the full weight of the bomber's tail section crashed into the radio gunner, as well as squadron technician who was seated in the rearmost part of the plane. Wrecks and remnants were unfolded and hung to dry on the wreckage of the fuselage. By summer, the fabric has regained its integrity and had become worthy of display as museum artifact. The stars on the fuselage and wings, shielded from the sun, had been so well preserved they appeared freshly painted, as if applied just the day before. Inside a shattered, white, plywood medical box from the onboard first aid kit, a pair of medical packets remained untouched. Despite being exposed to the elements for the case, they looked surprisingly fresh and vibrant. Near the main pile of wreckage lay a metallic three-bladed propeller, twisted into ram's horns, a testament to its proper function at the moment of impact. The thin green-brown moss covering the metal formed uneven patches, giving the impression that little time had passed since the tragedy. Around the site were skeletal remains of trees and rotting trunks, felled by the aircraft's charge. A survey of the area revealed that the plane had narrowly failed to clear a small taiga ridge. The forest it clipped was simply too high. Beyond the ridge, the flight path opened onto a swamp. Most likely, the pilot had no options left. Everything unfolded within seconds. The heavy bomber smashed into the forest like a colossal projectile. The bomber's clock had recorded the exact time of the crash, down to the minute. Scattered within the wreckage was an abundance of military attire, from blue tunics to fur-lined leather jackets. Pilots, much like tank crews, tend to haul an assortment of gear with them on board. An aviation technician's tablet case was found among the debris. Inside was a notebook containing a mix of notes, the names of squadron's pilots and technicians, technical observations about the SB bomber, and general notes on aviation mechanics. Most importantly, the tablet held the ID of their unit, the 80th Bomber Aviation Regiment, based at the Kegostrov and Yagodnik airfields near Arkhangelsk. The dispersion of airfields was unsurprising. By 1941, the Arkhangelsk Air Hub included 6 fully operational airfields with earthen and wooden runways. Aside from these documents, there were other loose sheets with scribbled notes, though they offered no concrete leads or additional context. The fragile paper, even when soaked and layered with roots, had to be carefully separated underwater with delicate movements. Otherwise, there was no way to work with it. At times, despair overwhelmed me. I would abandon this paper surgery and only return once I had calmed down. Progress came slowly, interrupted by bouts of frustration. The decayed, moldering paper often disintegrated into beautiful fragments, irretrievably destroying the information locked in its pencil scribbles. The effort was monumental. It turned out that no records of the missing crew existed in the regiment's archives. The traces were discovered purely by chance in the regiment's historical log, a document meant to chronicle the unit's journey, not to catalog losses. Someone had penciled in a marginal note: the 17th of December 1939. Missing, killed, crew of Karelkin. Squadron Commander Senior Lieutenant Georgy Vasilievich Karelkin. Squadron Navigator Senior Lieutenant Alexander Nikolaevich Safonov. Radio Gunner Junior Platoon Commander Yan Grigorievich Komaryshev. Squadron Technician Senior Lieutenant Sergei Ivanovich Kirishenkov. Karelkin and Safonov were found 8 to 10 meters from the plane, thrown clear when the aircraft struck the trees. These were not skeletons, but collections of shattered bones. Sergei Kirishenkov was located to the right of this fuselage. When the moss and decaying leaves covering his remains were removed, it became clear that the squadron technician had survived the crash. Near Kirishenkov's remains, were 2 opened cans of meat rations and 2 unwrapped bandages from individual medical kits. The man had survived the bomber's crash into the forest. Perhaps the impact was softened by his position in the SB's tail section, where passengers were typically seated. His body had collided with the radio gunner, which may have mitigated the force. In any case, Kirishenkov suffered only a broken collarbone and leg, injuries not immediately fatal. For a while, Sergei crawled among the wreckage, drenched in fuel and oil, bandaging himself, eating and waiting for rescue. The weather, by winter standards, was bearable, with a gentle evening snow covering the crash site. How long Kirishenkov survived remains unknown. We found his remains lying on his back, arms outstretched in a cross-like pose, dressed in technician's jacket with zippers. On his wrist were silver watches, a symbol of the belief that a watch stops at the moment of its owner's death. No one will ever recount the final moments of this doomed man, lying injured in the wilderness, devoid of any hope for salvation. A total of 24 search flights were conducted to locate the lost bomber, but none succeeded. Of the crew's families, only Safonov's relatives could not be traced. A native of Uglич in Yaroslavl, his appearance and fate remain a mystery to this day. The bomber's crew was finally laid to rest in June 2000 at the Vologda Cemetery in Arkhangelsk. Illinois 4. In Russia, in the Novgorod region, where fierce battles took place during World War II, search teams discovered the crash site of a Soviet Illinois 4 bomber. The site lies just 2 kilometers from a settlement, but reaching it is quite difficult due to the swampy terrain. For a long time, the crater itself was mistaken for an ordinary puddle until local historians took notice. They came, conducted a survey, and uncovered fragments of the bomber. The aircraft crashed back in the summer of 1941, and for many years the fate of its crew remained unknown. Now the identity of one of the fallen pilots has finally been established. Most likely, upon impact, the onboard bombs detonated, tearing the Illinois 4 apart. The explosion created a massive crater, which quickly filled with water. The plane remained lost for 80 years. Just minutes after the excavation began, a piece of the aircraft was pulled from the ground. Another find soon followed. Through combined efforts, parts of the bomber's engine were brought to the surface. On one of them, they found a crucial number, offering the possibility to trace the fate of the flight crew. The engine has several numbered parts. One of the serial numbers is located beneath the valve cover. Here's a close-up, you can clearly see the number 88, which indicates the engine series. By the evening, they had already identified the navigator, Fyodor Georgievich Kiselov. They even managed to contact his relatives. Until now, the pilot had been listed as missing in action. Search operations will continue. Lag 3. Another World War II aircraft was discovered by a team of divers from Veliky Novgorod. After examining the wreckage underwater, the search team identified it as a Soviet Lag 3 fighter. The plane was badly damaged. According to the expedition leader, the pilot was most likely covering a river crossing. During an aerial battle, the aircraft was hit. The impact with the ice bent the propeller and the plane caught fire. Using the serial number in the parts, they were able to identify the pilot, Dmitry Pavlovich Malkov, born in 1922, a native of Ivanovo region, a sergeant, just 20 years old. With the help of a winch mounted on the ice, the divers managed to retrieve the propeller from the bottom of the river, several large fragments of the aircraft, and the pilot's parachute, which he never got the chance to use. But the most significant find was the pilot's remains. which were later buried with full military honors. The Collector. Several years ago, Ukrainian police detained a resident of the Belyavsky district who had stored a large cache of World War II weapons across two of his summer homes. In the first house, they found 3 mortars, 2 Mosin rifles, 3 Nagant revolvers, a PPS-43 submachine gun, 84 Leaf 7.69mm cartridges, 458 casings, and 458 bullets. In the second house, police discovered 5 shells, 25 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition, and traces of explosive material. The man had found some of the weapons and munitions at the former battlefields and restored them, while others were purchased as deactivated replicas. But he had modified them to fire live rounds. German tank. This is a rare find, even for such a legendary location. In the Prokhorovka district, near the hamlet of Rydnenka, where the Battle of Kursk took place in 1943, search teams discovered a German tank. Unfortunately, the tank had been completely destroyed by the internal detonation of its ammunition. However, the tactical numbers and desert camouflage were still visible on its remains. A debate broke out among the searchers. Some believed the tank had arrived at Kursk from Africa, which would explain the sandy color. Others argued that this shade was factory applied, and that the tank crews and cells were responsible for repainting it to match the terrain where battles took place. Currently, all the tank's parts are stored next to the Battle of Kursk museum, and the question remains as to what to do with them, since reassembling a full tank from these fragments is impossible. It's worth mentioning that a few years ago, a turret from a similar tank was discovered in the same area, but nothing else was ever found. ES-2 tank and soldiers. In 2020, in Latvia, the remains of 6 Red Army soldiers and the wreckage of an S-2 tank were discovered. The search team, Legenda, led by Telis Smiths, found an unmarked Red Army burial site 13 kilometers from the town of Saldus. The soldiers' remains were intermixed with parts of a Soviet heavy tank. The abbreviation ES stands for Iosif Stalin. The ES-2 was the most powerful and heavily armored serially produced tank of World War II anywhere in the world. It is believed that after the battle, the soldiers' bodies were thrown into a crater formed by the explosion of the tank's ammunition. One of the soldiers was found with a 4-carriage medal, which helped identify him by the medal serial number. All 6 Red Army soldiers were reburied with full honors at a military cemetery, and the tank parts were sent to a museum. Friends, we highly recommend subscribing to our second channel, WW2 Metal Detecting. There you will also find fascinating videos about World War II discoveries, as well as a content focused on military vehicles and weapons. The link to the second channel is in the description. The Collector. Police in the city of Astrakhan confiscated more than 100 items, including weapons, medals, and other historical artifacts, from the home of a 46-year-old man. He had been illegally storing firearms, various calibers of ammunition, old sabers, rapiers, a naval dirk, bayonets, and military gear. In addition, 168 medals and orders were found in his home, including Shipka 1877, for the defense of Stalingrad, for the liberation of Prague, for the defense of the Caucasus, for the capture of Berlin, for the defense of Sevastopol, for the liberation of Warsaw, for the defense of Moscow, for the capture of Budapest, for the victory over Germany in the Great Patriotic War of 1941 to 1945, and many others. While inspecting the premises, police also found religious icons and their frames, books, pocket watches, rings, and women's jewelry, tableware, coins, banknotes, bones, and various documents. All items have been sent for expert evaluation to determine the age and value. The suspect claimed to be a collector, but was unable to provide proof of legal ownership. Machine gunners. In Russia's Smolensk region, the site of fierce battles between the Red Army and Nazi Germany during World War II, a search team discovered the remains of 2 Red Army soldiers. Based on the artifacts found, it was likely a 2-man machine gun crew. In the trench, the team uncovered ammo boxes for a Maxim machine gun and a toolkit with spare parts. Because one of the boxes was tightly sealed, the condition of the contents was excellent. The slight surface rust can be easily cleaned. The search team announced that after restoration, the find would be transferred to a local museum. The soldiers were buried with full military honors following the end of the search mission. Weapons cache. A stash of antique weapons and ammunition was found during the dismantling of an illegally placed garage in Kirovsky district of Astrakhan. A worker from the municipal agency Clean City discovered an ancient revolver and a Belgian Gallant Velodoc pocket revolver with a concealed hammer. Alongside the weapons were bullets, a sack, and a 1918 newspaper used to wrap the items. Police experts are currently determining whether the revolvers are operational. A criminal case has been opened for the illegal possession of firearms and ammunition. The weapons will most likely be sent to a local museum after the examination. Hello friends! Recently we told you about how Russian restorers brought back to life a combat I-16 aircraft that had made an emergency landing in the taiga during World War II. Reenactors have completed the first stage of restoration on another wartime aircraft, which was found in 2020. This time, it's a rare single-seat model of the Il-2 ground attack aircraft. Only a small number of these were produced in 1941, as later versions of the Il-2 were manufactured with a cockpit for both the pilot and a rear gunner radio operator. The restoration was carried out at the 123rd Aircraft Repair Plant in Staraya Russa, but in the future the aircraft is planned to be placed in a dedicated museum in Demyansk. The plane is quite large, with a wingspan of 15 meters. So far, as historians point out, the fate of the aircraft's crew remains unclear. On the day it went down, August 14, 1941, the regiment lost 3 Il-2s in the skies over Novgorod. Of the 3 crew members aboard those aircraft, 1 eventually returned to the regiment, while the other 2 went missing. A parachute was found inside the aircraft when it was raised. This presents another mystery. Either the equipment belonged to the pilot who made it back, he may have unstrapped the parachute because it's hard to swim with one, or the parachute's owner died in the aircraft, and, for some reason, his body was never recovered. The Il-2 landed on water on August 14, 1941, during the Nazi assault on Novgorod, the attempt to capture the city. At that time, the 62nd Regiment had just received a new aircraft and joined the battle. During the defense of the city, the regiment lost 13 planes. On that particular day, August 14, They lost 3. Before the main phase of the restoration began, it was decided to display the aircraft for 2 weeks for the local residents and visitors to see. After that, the IL-2 will continue undergoing restoration. Unfortunately, returning it to flight condition is not currently planned. Instead, it will take its place in the new museum. Recovery of Red Army soldiers. Search operations were recently carried out on Lake Value in the Novgorod region to locate Red Army soldiers who died during World War II. Divers from research units scanned the lake bed using metal detectors in search of metallic traces. Once detected, the area was carefully examined for soldier remains. The work is extremely difficult due to silt deposits. A single careless movement can stir up a cloud of sediment, completely obstructing the diver's vision. Recovering the remains of just one soldier can take up to 40 minutes. In the autumn of 1941, intense battles took place here for the village of Osinushka. During a failed offensive, Red Army troops lost several hundred men over the course of just 3 days before retreating. After the war, a dam was built on the river, and the water level of the lake rose by 4 meters, submerging the soldiers' remains. Interestingly, bones and personal belongings are preserved much better in water than in soil. The wooden parts of rifles have remained intact, and leather items look almost new. Based on the skeletons, the search team concluded that all the soldiers were killed by mortar fire while advancing on German positions. After a detailed inspection of personal items, some of which still bear inscriptions that may help identify the soldiers, all artifacts will be transferred to a museum, and the remains will be buried with military honors. Ammunition depot. Over 300 Soviet shells from World War II were discovered by searchers near the city of Veliki Novgorod. The 45mm and 76mm shells were stacked neatly near a roadside. Despite decades underground, the ammunition was still in surprisingly good condition and fully combat-ready. An explosive disposal unit was called to the site for safe removal and destruction. Sappers reported that a scrap metal hunter had apparently discovered the shells, removed the valuable brass casings, and left the dangerous explosive components in a pile by the road. All hazardous items were transported to a military range for disposal. Propaganda leaflets. During a scouting mission ahead of the main memory watch operations in the Novgorod district, searchers from the WWII expedition made an intriguing discovery: Soviet propaganda leaflets printed in German. The 74 recovered leaflets have already been sent to a museum for a detailed study. Their message is clear: surrender before it's too late. One leaflet applied psychological pressure with the line, "You, German soldier on the Volkha front, are in mortal danger." Another laid out 4 commandments: do not kill, do not enslave Russians, do not burn Russian towns and villages, leave Hitler's criminal gang. The leaflets are believed to date back to December 1943. Just weeks before the liberation of Novgorod from Nazi forces. They require careful handling and thorough examination. In the near future, linguists will provide accurate translations of each leaflet, and eventually the entire collection will be on display in the Hall of Military Glory for the public to see. STZ-5 recovered from a riverbed. In the fall of 2023, recovery efforts were completed for an STZ-5 artillery tractor that had sunk at the very beginning of World War II. The vehicle had spent over 80 years underwater, buried in silt, which helped preserve it remarkably well. During the war, The Red Army often used agricultural tractors as artillery haulers, though dedicated military versions were also produced. The most widespread of this was the fast-moving SDZ-5, used to tow divisional artillery such as the 122mm M30 howitzer or the 152mm M10 howitzer. Manufactured at the Stalingrad tractor plant from 1937 to 1942, the STZ-5 was produced in 9,944 units before the fighting in Stalingrad halted production. At the beginning of the war, the STZ-5 chassis was also used to mount BM-13-16 Katyusha rocket launchers. Technically, the STZ-5 was based on the mass-produced SXTZ NATI agricultural tractor. Powered by a 52 horsepower, 4-cylinder 1MA carburetor engine, it could reach speeds of 20 to 22 km per hour, though when towing a gun over rough ground, speed dropped to 10 to 15 km per hour. Fuel consumption could reach 1.5 to 2.5 liters per kilometer during towing. Only a handful of STZ-5s have survived to this day, despite their continued post-war use in civilian life, thanks to parts compatibility with the STZ-3. This particular STZ-5 was found in Belarus, near the Shara River in the Mostovsky district. Local residents tipped off searchers. The vehicle wasn't technically in the river, but nearby, where the original riverbed had once flowed before debris formed a natural dam. Initial area surveys were followed by water being pumped out of the site, and over 4 days, rescuers worked to pull the tractor to shore. The first attempt using an excavator failed due to high water levels and unstable sandy ground. Floating water pumps were brought in and divers tried to loop steel cables around the chassis. But the STZ-5 resisted, many cables snapped under the strain. By the 4th day, morale among the team was waning. Then, at 5 p.m. on November 2nd, ripples on the water signaled movement. Hope was rekindled. After 4 more hours of effort, the tractor was finally pulled ashore to loud cheers of "Hooray!" Historians believe that a bridge once stood at that location, and that the tractor may have fallen into the water when the bridge was bombed or destroyed. In late June 1941, tragedy unfolded along the strategic Belostok-Volkovysk-Slonim. The Red Army was in retreat. Troops from the so-called Belostok Pocket had only once escape route, the narrow corridor from Zelva to Derekhin to Slonim. The road became choked with military vehicles, artillery, infantry, cavalry, ambulances, refugees, and army supply trucks. Wave after wave of German dive bombers attacked the retreating columns with impunity. There were no alternative crossings in the region. Remarkably, the STZ-5 drivetrains arrived intact. Tracks, wheels, rollers, gearbox, carburetor were all preserved. However, the cab and the wooden cargo platform for transporting soldiers and shells were lost and will need to be rebuilt by the skilled team at the historical and cultural complex. They believe the tractor will be ready for operational display by spring of next year. And experts at the Stalin Line Museum are planning to restore the machine to full working condition. Second STZ-5 found in 2021. Another STZ-5 was discovered in August 2021 by Belarusian searchers near the village of Podvelika in Dyatlova district, Grodno region, submerged underwater. The tractor had been lost in the early days of the war during the breakout of the 3rd and the 10th Armies of the Western Front. It sank while attempting a river crossing. After being recovered and cleaned of mud and silt, the tractor was sent 2,700 kilometers to a museum in the Urals, Russia, where a team of specialists awaited. Restorer Sergei Frolov recalls being horrified at first by the scope of work ahead. After 80 years underwater, many metal parts had corroded, wood was destroyed, and the upper cap and doors were missing entirely. In May 2023, conservation efforts began. The plan was to disassemble the tractor into large modules to access the frame, suspension elements, and linkages. Every attempt was made to preserve original balls, quarter pins, engine parts, even wooden boards, anything that could be saved. It was a painstaking task. Some parts had become so brittle they crumbled at the slightest touch, while all threaded components were corroded and stuck. Initial cleaning was done with brushes of varying stiffness, followed by chemical treatments. Step by step, the restorers moved from one section to the next, examining every centimeter, like time traveling back to the 1940s. While removing the multi-fuel tanks behind the cap, they found spent Mosin rifle casings and a TT pistol round in a pile of sand, a haunting reminder of a soldier firing from the truck bed at advancing German troops. Even the rubber wheel casings still had their original mold seams. While they cleared the dashboard, the odometer revealed just 600 kilometers. The tractor was practically new. When internal components like the gearbox and valve covers were opened for cleaning and preservation, they were found to be in perfect condition. Gears looked brand new. After cleaning and stabilizing the parts, they were carefully reassembled. With no official documentation for the vehicle, restorers had to create a tear-down map to guide them. All metal and wood components were treated with stabilizers to prevent further decay. Initially, the team had planned to restore the tractor's original appearance, but in the end, they decided to preserve it exactly as it had been found. Today, this STZ-5 is a part of the museum exhibit in its authentic, untouched state, now available for all to see. German machine gun. This discovery was made in the Russian town of Gadich. While plowing his garden, a local man hit a piece of metal sticking out of the ground. When he pulled it free, he was genuinely shocked. It turned out to be a German MG-42 machine gun. Adopted by the Wehrmacht in 1942, the MG-42 was considered one of the finest machine guns in its class. The man immediately reported the find to the police. Despite the years on the ground, the weapon was in surprisingly good condition. Local forensic experts carefully examined and cleaned the machine gun, removing rust and corrosion and even restoring some moving parts. The only mystery remains how the German weapon ended up in a place where no battles ever took place. According to the one theory from police, it may have been brought back by World War II veterans as a war trophy and hidden away for better times. Another version suggests it might have belonged to post-war criminals, of whom there were many. Ammunition. A large quantity of World War II-era ammunition was recently neutralized by sappers in the Novgorod region. Mines and shells of various calibers were discovered in a field during plowing. The most dangerous find was a German rocket projectile from a Nobel warfare launcher, a weapon widely used by German forces throughout the war. These rockets had immense destructive power. Had it detonated during farm work, the tractor operator would have had no chance of survival. Each year, thousands of explosive items are discovered and destroyed in the Novgorod region, and the number isn't decreasing. Illegal trench digger. Russian police detained a man who had been illegally searching for World War II weapons and ammunition. He had restored much of the weaponry to working condition and was storing it at his home and in a garage. Among the seized items were a Degtyarev machine gun, 2 PPSH-41 submachine guns, a German MP-40, several rifles, a vast collection of weapon parts, and assorted ammunition. The man claimed to be a weapon enthusiast, collecting for display, but he couldn't explain why he also kept explosives and left shells at home. Police noted that if a single detonation had occurred, it could have harmed not only the collector, but his neighbors as well. Red Army soldiers. The search team Nakhodka discovered several Red Army soldiers who died while attacking German positions. All had suffered shrapnel and bullet wounds. According to searchers, some soldiers had fallen into crater holes after the battle, while others remained in the exact place they were killed, clutching their personal weapons. Their ammo pouches were full, and grenades were still inside their bags. One soldier was found alone on an old forest road. For decades, vehicles had driven over the area, unaware that less than a meter below lay the remains of a fallen soldier. The team leader said that all remains and personal belongings will be carefully examined for ID medallions or inscribed items to help identify the fallen. Afterward, the soldiers will be buried with full military honors in a war cemetery. A self-propelled gun found on the ground. One day, 5 tractor drivers were working the land, preparing it for crops. Suddenly, the plow caught on something buried in the ground. This wasn't unusual. Remnants of the Second World War were still commonly found in the soil. Over the years, much of the metal had been removed, but plenty still remained. Sappers often came to the area to neutralize unexploded shells and mines, as heavy fighting had once taken place here between the advancing Red Army and German forces. This time the plow had snagged on a pile of bricks. As the men began clearing them away, they uncovered large wooden logs. Curious, the tractor drivers decided to dismantle the structure to make the field suitable for planting. Removing several logs, they suddenly saw a gun barrel. "Looks like a cannon left over from the war," one of them said. Clearing more debris, they realized they had uncovered a military vehicle. "I think it's a Panther," one of the drivers guessed. They opened the hatch, peered inside cautiously, fearing they might find the remains of a crew. Fortunately, there were no skeletons, but what they did find was a full cache of ammunition. News of the discovery spread quickly. Locals from nearby villages came to see the find. A former soldier among them assessed the situation and concluded that the vehicle had not simply been buried. It had been deliberately hidden in a camouflaged bunker or underground shelter, likely a caponnier. That would explain why the self-propelled gun had remained so well preserved. The untouched ammunition suggested that the crew may have been killed before they could take cover, or that the Germans had abandoned the position in a rush, leaving behind what they couldn't carry. The theory that it was a Panther was dismissed. "No, guys," said one man, "this isn't a tank. It's a self-propelled artillery piece." The assault gun still bore its original paint and German crosses. The interior was filled with sleet, a result of standing in water for several years. An office engineer who came to inspect it said that if the tractor drivers hadn't accidentally torn open the bunker's roof, the vehicle would have been completely dry. By breaking the waterproofing layer with the plow, they had allowed water to seep in. The authorities were alerted. Police quickly cordoned off the area, and soon after, military personnel arrived. The condition of the vehicle was astonishing. Even the paint had been preserved. The self-propelled gun was extracted from the earth, loaded onto a Maze 537 heavy-duty transporter, and taken to Kaliningrad. In July 1984, It was sent to Moscow, where it remains on display in a museum to this day. The Skala Cliff Bunker. This is the unique cliff Caponier number 10, more commonly known as Dot Skala. It was constructed in 1934, carved directly into the rock on the western shore of Ostrovnaya Bay, designed to defend the coastline against potential enemy amphibious landings. To reach the interior of this fortified structure, you must descend a steep slope toward the sea, then walk knee-deep through water along the base of the cliff. The structure essentially consists of two double embrasure half-campanier bunkers protruding from the cliff side, each capable of delivering flanking fire. They are connected by a tunnel carved through the rock, forming a single four-embrasure campanier. One of the cliff-side dots, long-term firing points, housed the main entrance, while the second featured a secondary emergency exit. Each of the fighting chambers had two embrasures for flanking machine gun fire, and the main entrance was further protected by a small rifle embrasure. Inside, you can still see the remains of PS-31 machine gun mounts, part of the Gorno-Stalev system designed for use with the Maxim machine gun. From the connected tunnel, there are also a passage to a small ammunition storage room. Fortunately, no fighting ever occurred in this area, so the entire fortification remains untouched by war. However, salt from the sea air has badly corroded the steel beams and armored doors. After the war, all weapons and equipment were dismantled and the bunker was abandoned. Today, only the occasional adventurer makes their way inside to witness this fascinating piece of military architecture firsthand. In Russia's Kaliningrad region, a German BMW motorcycle was recovered from a swamp. Photos of the find appeared in the Kaliningrad Searches Forum, where experts immediately dubbed it the discovery of the year. Those who found it were incredibly lucky. The condition is swamp perfect, said one community expert. Judging by the photos, it appears to be a BMW R35, produced between 1937 and 1940. These motorcycles were widely used by German soldiers throughout the war. Moscow collectors reportedly showed immediate interest in the bike. The people who found it seem to be professionals, judging by their equipment and methods. It's unlikely they will give public interviews. Most likely, the motorcycle will be listed on auction site and go to the highest bidder, the expert added. Soldiers in a garden. Russian search teams Pyramida and Возрождение were working in Veliky Novgorod, where they found the remains of fallen Red Army soldiers right in the center of town. It appears that during the war, a shell crater in this spot was used to hastily bury the dead. The burial site was found in the garden of private home. A local resident, while digging on his property, began to uncover military items and eventually bones. He contacted a search team to carry out a proper exhumation. In total, the remains of over 30 individuals were found. They had simply been thrown together and covered with soil. Among the remains, several ID tags were discovered, some of which were immediately legible. Incredibly, the relatives of one of the fallen soldiers, Alexander Vasilievich Morozov from Volga Oblast, were found within just a day. All the fallen will be reburied with military honors at a war cemetery. Pistol in the attic. Two friends decided to explore the attic of a long-abandoned house, hoping to find out valuables that might be worth something. At first, the search seemed pointless. They assumed others had already looted the place. But just as they were leaving, one of them spotted a pistol. It had an unusual design, and signs of heavy corrosion hinted its age. After some online research at home, the pair discovered it was a Hungarian Frommer stop pistol developed in 1912 by Rudolf Frommer. The weapon had seen action in both World Wars. The Frommer stop served as a standard-issue sidearm for the Hungarian army until the early 1930s and remained in service with Hungarian police until the end of the World War II. U-2 aircraft. The Nakhodka search team located the crash site of a Soviet Tu aircraft, which went down in 1942. The U-2, later renamed PO-2 in honor of designer Nikolai Polikarpov, was a Soviet multi-purpose biplane first produced in 1927, one of the most mass-produced aircraft in history. Over 33,000 were built by 1953. During World War II, the U-2 was used for transport, liaison, and as a light night bomber. Locals recounted the story of the crash, passed down through generations. After the plane went down in 1942, German soldiers rushed to the site. One pilot resisted and was shot on the spot. The other, wounded in the crash, was taken to a village where a medic tried to save him, but he died a few days later. The Germans ordered locals to bury both airmen. Searchers later found archival documents identifying both pilots, who had been drafted from civil aviation. Their grave has since been located, and a memorial marker has been installed. KV-2 tank gun. In February of this year, forest rangers in Vitebsk region, Belarus, spotted civilians using a 4WD cargo truck to drag a large metal object out of a swamp. Police were called to the scene. The individuals were detained and the object was confiscated. It turned out to be an MT-1 152mm howitzer, the type of gun mounted on the KV-2 heavy tank. 2 months later, rumors spread online that the gun belonged to KV-2 HB-4696, a tank commanded by hero of the Soviet Union, Captain Georgy Filimonovich Kharaborkin, who died on July 6, 1941. However, experts refuted the theory, confirming that Captain Kharaborkin's tank was destroyed near the Beshenkovich-Vitebsk road, and its remains had been salvaged for scrap in the 1990s. Why only the gun was found and where the rest of the tank might be remains a mystery. It's possible the individuals had already removed other parts earlier without being noticed. Or perhaps the main hull is still buried, waiting to be discovered. Interestingly, a similar KV-2 barrel was found a few years ago under a residential building's foundation. During excavation, workers uncovered the barrel with its main lead steel attached and began lifting it with an excavator, only to discover a live 152mm shell inside. Had it detonated, the consequences could have been devastating. B-17 bomber. A team of Swedish underwater researchers was tasked with recovering the remains of the co-pilot from a B-17 flying fortress that sank near the island of Vis, Croatia, on November 6, 1944. This was the aircraft's first combat mission. It had only been on the European front for 3 days. The crew hadn't even received official markings for the plane. The Allies were targeting Nazi oil supplies and transport hubs. The B-17 took off from Italy to bomb Vienna, but due to heavy cloud cover, it diverted to a secondary target in Maribor, Slovenia. There, the bomber was hit by flak, killing the co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Ernest Weinert, with a fragment to the head. The pilot tried to land at the airfield on Vis, but ran out of fuel and was forced to ditch the plane in the sea. The landing was successful, The aircraft floated for about 15 minutes, allowing all 10 surviving crew members to swim to shore, where they were rescued by partisans. WWII, however, went down with the aircraft. The dive operation was extremely difficult due to depth and limited dive time, just 25 minutes per shift. Divers had to navigate through wreckage, tangled parachute cords, and zero visibility, even digging into the seabed to retrieve the remains. Eventually, they succeeded, and WWII's remains were brought to the surface. German AA gun, Flag 88. A few years ago, a resident of Dragonskaya 75, Belgorod region, Russia, made an astonishing discovery in his own backyard while digging a trench for utility lines. About 2 meters from his house, at a depth of 70 centimeters, he struck metal and soon unearthed several artillery shells. He called emergency services. Bomb disposal experts arrived and removed 3 shells and began excavating the area. They uncovered an entire German Flag 88 anti-aircraft gun, about 5 meters long and weighing 2 tons. According to historians, this area saw intense fighting in 1943 during clashes between the Red Army and Nazi forces. It's extremely rare to find such complete weapons in the region. Usually, only fragments remain, often mangled by Soviet artillery. Thankfully, the gun was clear of live munitions, and the team safely extracted it using heavy equipment. It was transferred to the Prokhorovka State Military History Museum Reserve for preservation. Messerschmitt Bf-109J6. In 2020, Hungarian divers made up a unique discovery at the bottom of Lake Balaton, a Messerschmitt Bf-109J6 fighter with the remains of its pilot. During World War II, fierce air battles took place over Hungary. One of the casualties was Corporal Sender Bereksasi, whose fighter crashed into the lake. In September 2020, divers from the Hungarian Defense Forces stumbled upon the plane's wreckage during military training exercises. The Messerschmitt Bf-109J6, built under license in Hungary, is of enormous historical value. No other original examples of this version have survived. After several years of preparation, in October 2023, the Military History Institute and Museum of the Hungarian Ministry of Defense carried out a carefully planned recovery operation. Divers extracted major components: the propeller hub, weaponry, engine and sections of the fuselage. These parts confirmed the aircraft's identity and cemented its place in Hungary's military-industrial heritage. BT-5 tank. A few years ago, search teams from St. Petersburg located and recovered parts of a Soviet BT-5 fast tank on the right bank of the Neva River, near the village of Nevskaya Dubrovka. The BT-5 was a Soviet light wheel-track convertible tank, mass-produced between 1933 and 1935. It was an upgraded version of the BT-2, featuring improved armament and a Soviet-built engine. These tanks were deployed in large numbers during the Battle of Leningrad, but were vulnerable due to their light armor. The search team pinpointed the tank's location using archival photographs and German aerial reconnaissance images. No crew remains were found. The recovered parts will be used to restore other BT series tanks. Military tractor STZ-5. As previously reported, a Soviet STZ-5 military tractor was recovered from a swamp in Belarus, where it had sunk during the Red Army retreat in the summer of 1941. Since then, rescuers have worked hard to bring the vehicle back to operational condition. Many components were missing. The cab and body were completely gone and had to be recreated from scratch using precise measurements. Finally,
The first official outing of the restored STZ-5 took place at the Stalin Line Museum Complex. This historic vehicle is now ready to participate in military parades and film productions. Illegal collectors. In St. Petersburg, police arrested 2 men involved in the illegal possession and sale of firearms and etched weapons. At the home of a 60-year-old man, officers seized 2 submachine guns, a revolver, a flare gun, several pistols, over 300 rounds of ammunition, and 86 pieces of bladed weapons. At the second suspect location, police found an AK rifle, multiple pistols, and a large number of cartridges. All the weapons were found to be fully operational. Armored car. A few years ago, Russian searchers made a remarkable discovery in the Mali-Volkovets River, near Veliky Novgorod. They recovered a BA-6 armored car, built in 1936, which had fiercely defended a breach on August 18, 1941, for over an hour, preventing German forces from crossing to the other side. In this unequal battle, the vehicle was eventually hit and plunged into the river, collapsing with the bridge. According to archives records, the armored car was commanded by Lieutenant Alexander Ivanovich Karlov, head of the reconnaissance company of the 5th Tank Regiment of the Red Army. At the time, the BA-6 was part of the 28th Tank Division, defending the city. The armored car was found 6 meters underwater, partially buried in the silt. Divers from the Russian National Guard had to deal with strong currents and low visibility. The BA-6 was badly damaged by an explosion, and there was real danger due to unexploded 45mm shells and grenades still inside. After recovery, experts believed restoration will be nearly impossible due to the severe damage. The chassis was broken into 3 parts, and the armored hull was shattered into 30 pieces. However, restorers in Pskov achieved the impossible. They fully restored the BA-6 to working condition. The project leader admitted it was one of the most challenging restorations they had ever done. They intentionally left battle damage and shell holes visible to preserve authenticity. Today, there are only 4 original BA-6 vehicles known to survive. German dugout. 2 searchers from St. Petersburg made an incredible find in the forest of Leningrad region. They went into the woods to search for World War II relics and decided to explore a former German trench. After digging several meters with no luck, something unexpected happened. One of their shovels suddenly fell into empty space. At first, they thought it was an animal burrow, but it turned out to be the entrance to a German dugout. The shelter was still intact and not filled with earth. It had been built from thick logs, which preserved its structure over decades. Finding a dugout in such a preserved condition is extremely rare. Excited, the man widened the entrance and climbed inside, hoping to find crates of ammo, German medals, or weapons hanging from the walls. But the dugout was completely empty and the air was damp and musty. Most likely, anything left behind had been taken by locals shortly after the war. Only a few spent Mauser rifle casings remained on the floor. Despite this, the pair were thrilled. Discovering such a well-preserved piece of wartime history gave them a huge moral boost and motivation for future expeditions. German warship. In 2021, near Lebedivka village in Ukraine, Tatar-Burnary district, divers recovered World War II munitions from sunken German barge, the Theoderic. Originally named Kherson, the ship had been captured by Germans and later sunk on November 12, 1943 by the Soviet submarine M111, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Yaroslav Ayuseliani.
The ship had been part of a military convoy. After being hit by a torpedo, it remained afloat long enough for the crew to be evacuated. Military divers extracted and safely transported explosive materials for neutralization. Over a period of 10 days, the team recovered 350 detonators, thousands of boxed cartridges, dozens of 75mm artillery shells. The operation involved 10 personnel, 3 pieces of specialized equipment, and 1 support vessel. German paratrooper. This discovery was made in April 2007 by a relic hunter known as Sturm. While searching a known battle site, he uncovered the remains of a German paratrooper, still with full gear and a dog tag. As the investigation continued, the identity and story of the fallen soldier came to light. The tag revealed the name Franz Erdmann, a radio operator from the 12th Company of the 4th Parachute Regiment. He had gone missing on March 20, 1943, while trying to restore communications on the front line. According to veteran WWII, who participated in those battles, Erdmann left the dugout with a field phone in hand and was never seen again. He was later found in a shell crater, helmet off so he could hold the phone to his ear, having been killed instantly by a piece of shrapnel to the head. He was still lying there in 2007, with the field phone next to his head. His helmet, a rare size 66, lay nearby and revealed traces of white winter camouflage when cleaned. Marshall's bunker. Deep in the wilderness of Russia far east, our team ventured into a forgotten bunker once used by Marshal Alexander Mikhailovich Vasilevsky, from which the final stages of the Manchurian strategic offensive of 1945 were commanded during the Soviet-Japanese War. From August 9th to September 2nd, 1945, the Soviet Army and Mongolian forces defeated the Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria and Northern Korea, effectively dismantling Japan's military presence in Asia. Marshal Vasilevsky directed operations from the town of Skovorodino and on August 17 issued an ultimatum to General Otozo Yamada, demanding a full ceasefire and surrender by noon on August 20th. This bunker was virtually unknown until the mid-2000s. Even locals had little idea of its significance. It had been abandoned right after the war. Reaching the bunker wasn't easy. Hidden in the hills, it was guarded by 3 embrasure stone machine gun emplacements, and nearby we found the remains of a concealed concrete pillbox with a clever defensive design. A pedal-activated concrete whizzer that lifted to allow fire and dropped back down to protect from return fire. We entered the bunker through one of the embrasures. Inside were rusted machine gun mounts and collapsed tunnels. Much of the structure was built quickly. Only the main command rooms were reinforced with concrete, while the rest used large timber. The interior was flooded with ice from groundwater, and access was only possible by crawling through narrow, partially collapsed corridors. In just a few years, the remaining structure may collapse entirely, making this a truly rare glimpse into the command center of one of the final operations of World War II. P-47 Thunderbolt. In 2018, a French dive team recovered the remains of an American pilot from a P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft that crashed near the end of World War II. The wreck had been known since the 1980s, resting off the coast of the Corsica in the Mediterranean Sea. In 2012, researchers were finally able to identify the aircraft's serial number, confirming its origin and pilot. The pilot's remains, located inside the cockpit, were recovered in 2018 from a depth of 60 feet.
Historians estimate that over 27,500 American servicemen remain missing in the Mediterranean Sea from the Second World War. U-869, the submarine that disappeared twice. The German U-869 was a type IXC-40 U-boat laid down on April 5, 1943 and launched on October 5, 1943. Under the command of Captain Lieutenant Helmut Neuberg, she joined the 4th Flotilla for training in January 1944 and later in the 33rd Flotilla for active duty. On December 8, 1944, U-869 departed from Kristiansand, Norway for her first combat patrol. By December 29, German Naval Command ordered her to patrol off the east coast of the United States, near New York, a move the Allies learned about through radio intercepts and decryption. However, the U-boat never confirmed receipt of this order. When a position report was finally received on January 6, 1945, it indicated the submarine was far northeast of the expected location. Assuming she had insufficient fuel, German command redirected her to patrol west of Gibraltar, expecting her to arrive there by February 1st. This new assignment was also intercepted by Allied intelligence. After failing to hear further from U-869, German Naval Command declared her missing in action near Gibraltar around February 20, 1945. Post-war records linked her presumed loss to an Allied attack on an unidentified submarine by the USS Fowler and French sub-hunter L'Indiscret on February 28. For decades, it was believed U-869 had been sunk there. A discovery that changed history. In 1991, a fisherman off the New Jersey coast lost his net. It had snagged on something deep below. Intrigued, a group of amateur divers investigated. On September 2nd, they discovered the wreck of submarine, partially buried and containing a visible torpedo inside an open tube. The wreck lay at a depth of 17 meters, 230 feet, making dives extremely risky. Identification took over 5 years, as damage and depth made exploration difficult and deadly. 3 divers lost their lives during expeditions to the wreck. Initial clues, such as knife engraved with a crew member's name and a builder's plate, contradicted official records, which placed U-869 sinking near Gibraltar. Only in 1997 was definitive proof found, a parts box in the electric motor room bearing the serial number U-869. But what really happened to U-869? There are 2 main theories exist. The first one, a self-inflicted kill. Divers discovered damage consistent with an internal torpedo explosion, likely from a circle-running torpedo, a malfunction known to have occurred in other cases during the war. Historian Clay Blair supports the theory, noting such accidents were not uncommon. The second one, a hedgehog attack. The U.S. Coast Guard disputes the self-inflicted theory and attributes the thinking to depth charges and hedgehog projectiles launched by the USS Howard D. Crowe, the E-252, and U.S. Coiner, the E-331, on February 11, 1945. This remains the official explanation. Dives, tragedy, and closure. Since the wreck's discovery, divers have faced incredible dangers. In 2020, John Charterton returned to the site. Time, tides, and commercial fishing gear had further damaged the wreck. What was once sealed by watertight hatches could now be freely entered, as if the hull had peeled away like a tin can. Most notably, a massive diesel day tank that blocked access to the motor room in 1997 had since fallen, allowing divers to swim into areas previously unreachable. But the wreck has come at a heavy cost. In 1997, diver Steve Hellman lost consciousness and was swept away by currents. His body was found 6 months later. Chris Rose and his son died after an emergency ascent without decompression from 70 meters, a fatal mistake. These events shook the diving community. Some left the team, others gave up deep diving entirely. Yet, the most emotional moment came when Andrew Nagel made his first dive on the wreck. Andrew is the son of Captain Bill Nagel, the fisherman who discovered the wreck in 1991, but died before ever diving it himself. Andrew's dive served as a poignant tribute to his father and the many lives lost, both in war and in the effort to understand it. Recovery of the crew's remains is not planned. Il-2 Flying Tank. The search team Nadezhda recently recovered a legendary Soviet Il-2 ground attack aircraft in the Tver region. The plane had been shot down during intense battles near Zhev in August 1942, and decades later, its remains were accidentally discovered in a local swamp. Using archival documents, the team was able to uncover the plane's story. It was shot down during Gorodishchensk operation, which led to the breakthrough of German defenses by the Kalinin and Western fronts and a forced enemy retreat. But at a terrible cost. The Il-2s, in particular, suffered massive losses. The recovery was no easy task. The terrain was swampy, overgrown, and swarming with insects. Despite the conditions, the team managed to extract the aircraft and identify both the unit and the pilot. Junior Lieutenant Vasily Pavlovich Sergeyev, a squadron leader from the 62nd Assault Aviation Regiment, 236th Assault Air Division, shut down on August 15, 1942. But he survived that crash. By July 1944, as a captain, Sergeyev had completed 110 combat missions against enemy airfields, rail stations, crossings, and troop concentrations. He destroyed 4 enemy planes on the ground. On October 26, 1944, he was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, along with the Order of Lenin and Gold Star Medal for courage and heroism. After the war, Sergeyev continued his service, graduated from the Navigator School in 1946, and retired as a major in 1956. He lived in Kiev and passed away on September 17, 1991. He is buried at the Kiev City Cemetery. Soviet 76mm infantry gun, 1927 model. In 2020, a Soviet 76.2mm infantry gun, model 1927, was recovered from a river in Smolensk region by local searchers. They managed to drag it by hand uphill after pulling it from the swamp. This gun, the first mass-produced artillery piece developed in the USSR, was designed for direct support of infantry and cavalry units. It was produced between 1928 and 1943, with about 18,000 units made. It saw action in pre-World War II conflicts and throughout World War II. The restored gun is now proudly on museum display. Another 76mm infantry gun was recently recovered from the Neva River in Leningrad region, likely lost during a river crossing when Soviet forces attempted to break the siege of Leningrad. The gun's shield bears multiple bullet and shrapnel marks. Restorers cleaned and preserved the gun to prevent corrosion, and it's now on display at the Zinovy Kolobanov Museum of the Battle for Leningrad. 45mm anti-tank gun. During a recent expedition in the Ural region, search teams found a 45mm anti-tank gun, model 1937. This model was heavily used in the early years of the war, but its limited armor penetration led to it being replaced by the M42 in 1942. Production stopped in 1943 with a total of 37,354 guns built between 1937 and 1943. The recovered piece bears shrapnel and bullet damage, including a badly damaged barrel, suggesting it was hit by an explosion during the Battle of Kursk in 1943 and left behind where it fell. The team has decided to transfer the gun to a museum for preservation. The rise of the Stag 40 from the swamp. The Sturmgeschütz 3 was a midway German self-propelled artillery vehicle of the assault gun class used during World War II. Produced in multiple variants from 1940 to 1945, it became the most numerous armored vehicle of the Wehrmacht, with a total of 8,636 units equipped with 75mm guns. The Stag 40 in question was discovered in Russia, in a swampy lake not far from a city, in November 2001. The vehicle was raised from the bog in April 2002. It had been lying upside down, with its legs facing upward, submerged at a depth of about 8 meters. Inside, the remains of the crew were found. The Stag 40 was operated by a crew of 4, but only 3 skeletons were recovered. Surprisingly, the ammunition was still intact, as well as MP-40 submachine gun and several personal belongings of the crew. Upon inspection, the assault gun showed multiple impact marks, one of which appears to have been the fatal shot, likely a sharp charge round that pierced their armor and destroyed the crew. Identification tags were found, along with a document and helmet belonging to a soldier named Z. Brown. It is believed the vehicle was knocked out in late winter of 1943, right on the frozen surface of the lake, during a German tank group's attempt to break through. According to one version, the vehicle remained on the ice after being hit, then sank during the spring thaw. Another theory suggests the vehicle broke through the ice during its movement and sank instantly along with the crew. The Stag 40 belonged to Kampfgruppe Chevalier, a special operational unit of Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Günther von Kluck. The remains of the crew were buried with honors at a consolidated military cemetery in the town of Sebesh. Today, the Stag 40 Aus G is located in the city of Saratov, displayed outdoors in a museum. Photo film. At the site of a former German POW camp, searcher Ilya Ulyanenko discovered a developed film roll buried in the sand. After years underground, followed by washing and drying, the emulsion had remarkably preserved images of preparations for Christmas. The photos clearly depict a soldier's family, scenes of baking traditional cookies, children with geese, a toy stroller, and the fourth Sunday of Advent. A round wreath with 4 lit candles sits on the table. The fourth, often called the Angel's Candle, was traditionally lit last, symbolizing the final coming of the Savior in glory, accompanied by angels to bring the faithful to heaven. Faces from a long-lost era. And next to the film was found a wedding ring. aircraft discovery. In Belarus, near the village of Poletichi, Kobrin district, members of the Patriotic Search Unit Aviapoisk Brest uncovered the wreck of World War II era Soviet bomber, along with the remains of the pilot. The first clues came 6 years earlier when local resident Leonid Gelak told the group that his parents had once seen a Soviet aircraft crash nearby during the war. Though the precise location was unclear, in 2017, a preliminary survey found fragments of a Soviet SB high-speed bomber, not a fighter, as initially thought. The team waited to begin full excavation until the proper equipment could be secured. In early 2021, the dig began. The topsoil was removed, reaching a depth of over 2 meters. Still no plane. They kept digging down into blue clay, and suddenly an oil sheen appeared on the water's surface. Beneath it, part of a propeller blade. They were on the right track. Next came landing gear, a gearbox, and blades. To retrieve the engine with its serial number, they had to dig 6 meters down. When the excavator could go no deeper, searchers descended into the pit by hand and made a startling discovery: a cluster of aerial bombs. After an EOD team safely removed 5 bombs, the dig continued. Finally, under the gunner's cabin, the team found a mummified body of a Soviet airman. His junior sergeant insignia still visible on his uniform. A notebook found nearby confirmed the plane belonged to the 140th High-Speed Bomber Regiment. From an operational summary dated June 24th to 25th, 1941. On June 24th, from 1755 to 1805, 2 groups of 9 aircraft each attacked enemy tank columns near Grudopol, Myslovidi, Ivatsevichi, and the bridge over the Shara River. 8 aircraft did not return. On June 25, another 6 aircraft continued attacks in the area. The regiment lost 15 aircraft over 2 days. The air war in the early days of the German invasion brought devastating losses to the Soviet bombers, who had to fly without proper reconnaissance or fighter escort. After forensic procedures, the pilot's body was moved to a Kobrin morgue and aircraft parts were sent to Brest, destined for the Brest Hero Fortress Memorial. Among the remains was a well-preserved Komsomol ID. The fallen pilot was identified as Junior Sergeant Pyotr Alexandrovich Shmygov, born in Vikodvora village, Ivanovo region. He was only 20 years old, listed as missing in action for 81 years. His family was located within days. He was buried with full military honors. 250-kilogram bomb. In 2023, a 250-kilogram German aerial bomb from World War II accidentally detonated during removal in England. The bomb was uncovered during construction work and a sand enclosure was built around it before the extraction began. Despite all safety precautions, something went wrong. The bomb exploded unexpectedly. The blast shattered windows, damaged cars, and collapsed scaffolding. But, miraculously, no one was injured. The story of this tank was shared by locals from the village of Poboyne, who recalled how a Sherman tank from the 6th Tank Army of the First Ukrainian Front, commanded by General Vatutin, met its fate during the Battle of Korsun-Shevchenkovsky in February 1944. For unknown reasons, the Sherman ended up on the frozen river Gniloy Tikich. The crew was incomplete. Only 4 men, led by 19-year-old Lieutenant Alexei Morozov. 3 of the men didn't even have soldier's ID books.
as they had been recently conscripted from newly liberated territory. The Germans were expecting an attack and had prepared well. A camouflaged, self-propelled gun had been hidden inside a farmhouse, its barrel poking through a broken window. As the Sherman approached to within 200 meters, the first shot crippled the left track. The second armor-piercing round tore through the turret, knocking it off. Frick remembers were killed instantly. The driver, wounded in thigh, managed to crawl to a nearby house, but was found and executed by the Germans the next day. Discovery and recovery of the tank. In the summer of 1998, during a search operation in Zhaskiv district, Cherkasky region in Ukraine, the Sherman was found at a depth of 4 meters in the Gniloy Tikich River. Archival research revealed that Sherman tanks had been supplied to the Soviet Union under the Land-Lease Act, arriving via the North Sea route through Murmansk. Out of nearly 48,000 Shermans produced during the war, over 2,000 were delivered to the USSR. This particular tank was the only known Sherman to have fought in combat and been recovered in such preserved condition between the Kola Peninsula and the North Caucasus. The actual recovery began only in September 2004. Military engineers brought in mass 537 tank transporter and a T-54 base recovery vehicle with a winch. The tank lay about 70 meters from shore, turret detached and lying on its side nearby. Searchers feared that the cannon might still be loaded. They removed the turret and washed it out with a fire hose and discovered, to their alarm, a live shell still lodged in the barrel. Military sappers considered detonating the turret on site, but the team insisted on preserving the tank whole. In an extremely dangerous operation, they unscrewed the fuse and extracted the shell. A 75mm American high-explosive round in perfect condition. Final stages of the recovery. To dislodge the tank from the riverbed, a fire truck was brought in to wash away the case of silt. The first attempt, attaching cables to the front towing hooks, caused the cables to snap under pressure. The team then fed a cable through the driver's hatch and turret opening. Eventually, the tank was pulled close to the shore, but became stuck against the roots of a large tree. The winch failed again, so they anchored the mass 537 to another tree 50 meters away, and after 10 minutes of straining, the Sherman finally rolled onto a dry land, tipping up on its side before righting itself. Once cleaned, the tank was identified as a 1942 Sherman model. Remains of the crew, machine gun casings, and 4 artillery shells were found nearby. The Sherman was loaded onto a flatbed truck and sent to a tank repair plant in Kiev, where it was carefully cleaned, the broken track repaired, and the turret reattached. In a formal ceremony, the restored tank was handed over to the Central Museum of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Today, General Sherman is displayed at the observation platform of the National Defense Academy. The banner. This spring, a remarkable discovery was made in Poland. The battle flag of the 68th Infantry Regiment Września, one of the units that fought in the Battle of Bruza River in September 1939, was found near the town of Ilov, close to Sochchakchu. It was discovered by members of the Sochchakchu Historical Research Group. Alongside the flag, a pre-war military uniform was also recovered, both hidden inside a milk churn. The find was transferred to the Polish Army Museum, where the flag was carefully removed from the container. Due to moisture seeping in through the corroded metal, the flag had suffered serious damage and is now undergoing textile restoration. Experts hope to save it. The same restoration workshop had previously restored a banner of the 6th Kiev Ulan Regiment, found in a grave at Pavarsky Cemetery in 2009. In 1939, Polish forces around Sochchevchu found themselves encircled while trying to break through enemy lines along the Bzura River and Campinas Forest. Facing capture, many soldiers hid weapons, gear, and regimental banners, sacred symbols of their units. This flag was likely hidden during that time, 86 years ago, and had originally been presented to the 68th Regiment by President Ignacy Moshiki on May 28, 1928, in the city of Retesnia. The Norwegian volunteer. In this 1942 photo, SS Battalion volunteer Hans Christian Romerud holds the skull of a Soviet soldier in northern Karelia. According to eyewitnesses, he intended to turn it into a candlestick or ashtray. In the next photo, we see the skull of Romerud himself, discovered on June 25, 2006, 62 years after his death. On June 24, 1944, after being wounded, Romerud shot himself to avoid capture by soldiers of the 561st Regiment, 205th Rifle Polar Division, who stormed and took the Capulet Heights, defeating the SS forces stationed there. Only half of the 300 men in SS Battalion North survived the fierce fighting. Romerud's skull bore a bullet hole in the right temple, alongside a spent casing and his identification tag. Researchers estimate that over an area of about 3 square kilometers, over 600 soldiers were killed during this battle. Roughly 400 to 450 Soviet troops from the Polar Division, 142 Norwegian volunteers killed or missing, with 38 taken prisoner, and significant German losses despite their attempts to break through and assist. World War II bunker. During construction work in the Polish city of Rybnik, a bunker from the Second World War was unearthed. This fortification was originally intended to defend against a possible German invasion in 1939. Unfortunately, no historical records remain detailing what occurred inside the bunker during the war or whether it played any role in resisting the city's siege. It is believed that after the war, rather than dismantling the massive structure, a task deemed too difficult, it was simply buried under soil. City officials decided to preserve the bunker as a historical monument and relocate it to a more accessible site. Lifting and transporting the nearly 100-ton structure was a complex operation. Large cranes were brought to Rybnik, and the project was carried out in 2 stages. First, extracting the bunker and placing it on Dobrovsky Street, and second, transporting and installing it in its final location. The effort cost several 100,000 zlotys and delayed the opening of a discount store for several months. In the future, the bunker will be open to the public for viewing. The German towing vehicle. In Russia, near the settlement of Belaya Berezka in the Bryansk region, search teams recovered a German World War II era towing vehicle from the bottom of Desna River. The vehicle was submerged near the site of an old wartime crossing. Due to the strong currents and unstable riverbed, searchers had to spend considerable time washing sand away from the buried vehicle. Local fishermen first tipped off the team about its location. At first, it was thought to be a Soviet Ya-12 towing vehicle. The discovery took a dramatic turn when searchers from Smolensk pulled out the front axle.
which clearly identified the vehicle as a rare German half-track, a Krauss Maffei towing vehicle. These Krauss Maffei tractors typically featured on a 11-seat open cargo area, side door openings for troops, a canvas roof with windows, an ammo storage compartment, and a 3.5-ton mechanical winch. In the final phase of the war, they were often refitted with wooden cargo beds, sometimes equipped with anti-aircraft guns, or used to carry ammunition racks and gun crews for heavy artillery. In the USSR, in 1989, a T-34 tank that had sunk during World War II battles was raised from the Seversky Donets River. The recovery operation went smoothly. The main difficulty was that the tank was heavily silted. According to a diver, they had to wash away about 4 meters of a riverbed sediment. The turret was separate from the hull, which made the lifting easier as the weight of the 34 was significantly reduced. The front part of the hull was damaged, and a couple of road wheels were missing, but overall the tank was in good condition. Many World War II veterans were present at the recovery. Perhaps some of them had fought in these very areas, liberating the motherland from the Nazis. The circumstances of the tank's sinking unknown. There are 2 versions. It was being transported across the river for repair after battle damage and sank, or perhaps during the river crossing, a shell hit it, causing damage, destroying the flotation device, and sending the T-34 to the river bottom. No remains of the crew were found. For 1989, finding the missing parts to restore the tank properly was not a major problem. I myself remember a pile of broken or perhaps cut up parts from various tanks lying behind the school I attended. I recall one of them had a round hatch. There were also 3 different tracks. Sometime around 1989 or 1990s, I moved to a different district. When and where all that went, I don't know. After a short period of time, the tank was repaired and installed on a pedestal in a festive ceremony. But what was revealed? The restoration was done simply terribly. To be honest, it wasn't even a restoration, but a substitution of the combat vehicle. The hull came entirely from a post-war T-34-85M with star pattern road wheels and angular front fenders. The engine deck and fuel tanks are homemade. The only thing that remained original from the T-34 is the turret. It is a hexagonal, cast nut-type turret from 1942 without a commander's cupola and with no bridge between the hatches. The gun is elevated to a huge angle, about 30 to 35 degrees, which contradicts realism. The turret is completely welded on. The handrails on the turret for infantry were not preserved. The tank was planned to be restored, but what prevented this is unknown. The whereabouts of the original hull of the recovered combat vehicle also remains a mystery. The Pacific Stalin Line. The Pacific Stalin Line is an unofficial name for the long-term fortifications built across the entire far eastern coastline of the USSR, stretching from Anadyr to the Korean border, including Kamchatka and northern Sakhalin. Its total length exceeded 11,000 kilometers. Officially, this system didn't have a unified name. Instead, different regions were designated as coastal defense sectors. Coastal batteries of Kamchatka. Construction of coastal batteries on the Kamchatka Peninsula began in 1937. Their primary role was to protect the entrance to Avacha Bay, home to the city of Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, and the southernmost tip of the peninsula, Cape Lopatka. Along the scenic shoreline of Stanitsky Bay in Viluchinsk, you can still find concrete bunkers, artillery batteries, and even tank turrets mounted on reinforced concrete bases. Artillery battery number 961. Battery number 961 was constructed in 1938 on Cape Stanitsky, Kamchatka. It was armed with four 100mm B-24 naval guns. The walls of the fortifications were between 3 to 7 meters thick. Inside, the battery featured ammunition magazines, crew quarters, and technical rooms. It had an autonomous water supply and power system, ensuring operation even in remote conditions. In the event of radiological or biological contamination, soldiers could remain safely inside thanks to the special filters and ventilation system built in the structure. Battery 961 was part of the Pacific Coastal Defense Belt and remained in service until the 1970s. As missile technology advanced, static artillery fortifications became obsolete. The batteries were decommissioned and their weapons were either removed or abandoned. Current state. As of November 2024, battery number 961 on Cape Stanitsky has been fully dismantled. However, two T-45 tank turrets, once part of its defenses, remain in place atop concrete casemates, standing as silent witnesses to its history.
This tank, mounted on pedestal, is familiar sight to many who have passed through the village of Parfino in the Novgorod region. At first glance, it may seem like just another monument commemorating the heroism of Soviet soldiers during the Great Patriotic War. To most, it looks like an ordinary tank, one of dozens like it scattered across the country. But few know that this is a truly unique vehicle, the only surviving example of the KV-1S tank. It was discovered by search teams in early 1988, about 2 kilometers northeast of the village of Gorby. How did this tank end up in the Novgorod swamps? Why is it considered unique? How was it recovered and what is known about its history? That's what we will explore in today's video. Searchers had long been aware that a tank had sunk into the swamp near Gorby during the war. The recovery operation began in January 1988. A veteran hunter who had fought in the area during the war pointed out the exact location where the vehicle had gone under. After removing the top layer of peat, the team discovered the tank lying upside down. Many believed that recovering it would be impossible. The terrain was deeply waterlogged, and even getting there on foot was a challenge. Despite the frost, the swamp hadn't frozen solid enough to support heavy equipment. So the team had to build a log road through the marsh to the tank. As soon as the excavator started digging around the KV-1, the pit filled with water. Pumps were brought in to continuously drain it. Using two tractors, they began a slow and difficult pull, dragging the tank 150 meters through water and pit to solid ground. The turret turned out to be detached and was recovered separately a bit later. All recovery work was completed on February 18, 1988. A one-of-a-kind machine. It was soon confirmed that this was the only known surviving KV-1S tank of its kind. Interestingly, the hull belonged to a standard KV-1, while the turret came from a KV-1S. During the war, only a few such hybrids were assembled. At the time, the factory lacked proper KV-1S hulls, so KV-1 hulls were temporarily used to mount KV-1S turrets. The vehicle bears several dents
and marks from German shells, which failed to penetrate its armor. The running gear was damaged, and the upper rear armor plate was missing. Searchers made repeated attempts to find archival records describing the battle in which this given 1S was lost, but their efforts were unsuccessful. 4 PPS H-41 submachine guns. In 2023, the Kursk region of Russia took an active part in the national environmental campaign Water of Russia. Across the Rhine, events were held with the participation of 2,425 people and a total of 87 kilometers of shoreline were cleaned. The Kursk region won the award for most unusual find. During underwater inspections, divers recovered weapons from World War II from their riverbed. While surveying the submerged riverbank, the divers discovered 4 PPS H-41 submachine guns. Fierce battles between the Red Army and Nazi forces took place here in 1943. It is believed that the weapons ended up in the river during the crossing of the river by Red Army soldiers. The PPS H-41s were in surprisingly good condition. The find was handed over to the police, who stated that the weapons would later be transferred to a museum. The collector. In Brazil, police discovered a private collection of over 1,000 Nazi-related artifacts from the Third Reich in the home of a man. The collection was valued at 3 million euros. Police arrived at the residence following allegations of child abuse and during the search uncovered the collection. It included several sets of German officer uniforms, each valued at 250,000 euros, as well as party badges, medals, and identification documents. One of the documents even had the man's own photograph glued onto it. Weapons were also found. The man was arrested, and the entire collection is to be transferred to a museum. Saboteur's cache. On November 30, 1987, in the area of the Politis Reservoir near the town of Strashne in southern Czechia, foresters discovered a suspicious metal box beneath the roots of an uprooted fir tree. A demolitions expert from the regional office of the National Security Agency of Czech Republic, Lieutenant M. Plaschel, was called to the scene. After disarming a trap, he opened the box and, upon seeing its contents, requested reinforcements. Further operations involved Captain A. Klich from Chosky Budyovice and explosives experts from the Federal Office of the National Security Agency in Prague. During the search, 15 more boxes containing sabotage equipment were discovered. Each box was marked with white chalk numbers from 1 to 16. 12 boxes were carefully extracted and opened, while 4 had to be destroyed on site. These were military transport crates, measuring approximately 50 centimeters high, 60 centimeters wide, and 100 to 120 centimeters long. Their edges were rubber sealed, and both the interior and exterior were painted with German camouflage paint. The sheet metal used was of exceptionally high quality and showed almost no corrosion, despite decays in the ground. The sabotage keys inside were in perfect condition even after 40 years and remained fully operational. Protection against unauthorized removal was provided by a cable attached to the bottom of each box, connected to a ZZ-42 pull detonator, which could trigger a 3 kg TNT charge buried beneath the wooden base on which the crate stood. To prevent reopening, a stick grenade with a wooden handle had been placed at the bottom under the contents. Captain Klich conducted functional tests and confirmed that all munitions, including signal devices, were fully operational. Detonators, flash grenades, smoke canisters, illumination and incendiary devices, everything functioned correctly.
including burn times. Electrical igniters and detonators were also intact. Only the boxes containing chemical grenades, smoke charges, and bottle of toxic substances showed signs of damage. All shelters were dug into the southern slope and equipped with drainage leading to a nearby artificial well. They were expertly camouflaged. It was later determined that this cache had been created by Werewolf Sabotage Organization between 1945 and 1947. That's all for today, friends. You can support our channel by sending a super thanks in any amount or by becoming a sponsor for just $1 via the link in the description. Good luck to everyone!